My guest today is the CEO and founder of Everledger, which is a leading emerging technology company that tracks the provenance of high-value assets, in particular diamonds. Her extensive background in emerging technologies, business, jewellery and insurance, Leanne is pushing the boundaries with Everledger in building a global verification system that asserts transparency of the diamond chain and supply chain process. Her leadership role in technology has been recognised, winning awards including the 2018 Advance Australia Award, Innovator of the Year 2018 at the Women in IT Awards in London, and as well as being named in the UK Business Insider's 26 coolest women in UK tech. That's a pretty cool title to have. She was also named Brummel Magazine's top 30 female innovators in 2016, is an IBM champion, and Leanne is an appointed member of the World Economic Forum's Blockchain Council and co-chair for the World Trade Board Sustainability Trade Action Group, and is on the IBM Blockchain Platform Board of Advisors, as well as being the Queensland Chief Entrepreneur. Apart from that, Leanne does very little else. Leanne Kemp, welcome to FireTech Connect.
It's so good to be connected. Well, I'm managing. Today is the first day that the Premier has given us permission to, of course, meet in open public spaces. So I decided to take advantage of that timing. I'm sitting right here in the middle of New Farm Park. And when you say I don't have time to do much else, well, I do have time. I have time to sit in the park and talk to you.
Oh, that's good. Yes. Well, I've been getting a bit of cabin fever, so I've decided to get out and about myself today. I'm going to go and find something to do other than sit in this room. I know you've been obviously very busy, and as have I, talking to a lot of companies that are in distress and a lot of uncertainty in the world that we live in at the moment. What's your perspective on what's happening, particularly not only in Queensland but in Australia in general?
Look, I think firstly, I think Australia has copped a domino effect of disasters, whether that be fires, of course, in December last year, and now the world is facing the pandemic with COVID. So, there's also a compounding effect that's occurring. We certainly know and understand that COVID is a health crisis coupled more intimately with an economic crisis, going from not only a recession but also a depression, because we're compounding our health factors as well as economic. And we need to be finding certainty in uncertainty, of which entrepreneurs are great at doing. In fact, that's how we operate, is our new normal, which most are now starting to come to terms with. And also remoteness and distributed working, particularly in a global context for technology companies, is also something that we're very well used to doing. The world is catching up quite quickly, particularly when we hear from the voices of those big leaders in the world like Microsoft saying, there's 2 years digital transformation that had to happen in 2 months. And necessity is the mother of all invention. And what great time right now to be an entrepreneur and an innovator, and particularly in the state of Queensland, because we have so much investment that has been poured into the entrepreneur and ecosystem for the better part of a decade. And now we're starting to see those early sprouts of genius come out in a time of crisis.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, back in the dot-com period of sort of 98, 99, when I was in the US, we were talking about, that e-commerce was going to dominate the world, and e-learning and, video conferencing was something that we were talking about back then. That's 20 years ago. And so to that extent, it's been fairly, it's been growing, but it's been fairly slow. And so we're seeing this huge spike. I think in years to come, economists are going to look and see this spike on the charts and say, what happened there, right? So that acceleration is exciting, and with it brings opportunities. But just on the uncertainty, like you, I've sort of lived in a world of uncertainty pretty much all my life. My wife's used to that. We're used to that uncertainty. That's what we've done. That's, what entrepreneurs do, and they put themselves out there. What about those people that aren't used to living with that uncertainty?
Well, you're right about this, but I think they've always lived most. In fact, even myself, have lived in an understanding of a certain set of skill sets that we hold now, and deploy that into a sense of meaning and purpose in your job or in your chosen career pathway, or even to ingest it with inside of an idea being an entrepreneur. And The uncertainty has always existed. It's just compounded now with the threat of our actual existence on this planet. We started to hear the early stages of that threat, of course, late last year, with climate and environment and sustainability being at the forefront of the concerns for the health of the world. And now compounding the health of the world with health of citizens, every single one of us, which is a respiratory disease. And as humans, we need to breathe. So there's no probably scarier disease than the one that we're actually facing right now. So the uncertainty lies in our actual existence. When we face an existential crisis economically, that's one motivation. We can always curb our discretionary spend, but to face an existential crisis as a human, am I going to live or die through this experience? Then you get to rethink the priorities of life in a far more different way.
Yeah, and I think we hear a lot of people saying, when we get back to normal, I'm sort of hopeful that we don't go back to normal, that we actually have an opportunity here to sort of reinvent, in a way, what the future looks like and how our behaviours change.
Yeah, look, I don't want to be the same person I was when I was 18 years of age, and nor do I want to be the same leader I was 5 years ago. So why go back to what it was? We should always be living in a constant state of evolution as human creatures we are. It's the Darwin theory. So now we're compressing that into a timeline that is very difficult to put both of our hands on, in terms of being a citizen on this planet, but also an innovator. We have to be able to try and understand the way upon which we can reimagine a healthy, well-balanced existence, whether that be mental health and physical health, and then also a level of prosperity. There are concerns, of course, that this crisis is a crisis that will see many tier one nations sail through. Yes, there'll be concerns around the ratio of deaths, of course, but this hits very hard into countries that don't have hardcore infrastructure in place for health services. Australia, we're a lucky country, then there's no doubt about it. And yet again, we've come out lucky. We make our own luck, though, because we do have very good governance systems in place. It's clear that we have well entrenched three-tier government systems that help to support financially, as well as putting in the right policies for the health and the well-being and the economic prosperity of our citizens. And not all places in the world have this, but I also say that whilst we're a lucky country, we might also be sitting in the world of complacency, because whilst we read about the global financial crisis, Australia didn't really fare up when it comes to the implosion of the financial crisis. And we're not really understanding what the outcome of COVID looks like just yet. We've already had prompting up, we've got a crutch, an economic crutch that was given to us as we're hobbling through with the loss of jobs and unemployment with our JobKeeper platform. We're starting to see huge stimulus packages coming in from government to help them in hardcore infrastructure. But we're not yet seeing where that true cliff is. September, August, this sort of timeline is the interesting timeline. We'll be faced directly in the smack of our winter. And we know this is a respiratory disease, not a disease, a virus. And there will be a second rising. So, and of course, in October, we will see now the true impact of the financial concerns around many companies as we come off the JobKeeper platform. And, the Prime Minister said just recently he's concerned about zombie companies, those that are just being propped up with the payment of stuff. Ultimately, there isn't really any strong asset base or revenue base to take them forward in a declining market, more so than ever, which is why we speak about pirouetting and persevering and pivoting through times like this. And I just wrote an article, in fact, it went out in the Chief Entrepreneur's newsletter, and it talks about how do we think about recovery now. And there's a certain element of the recovery, which is a third dimension. This third dimensionality really looks at if there's rapid uptake of digital technologies, or if we do have to stay in an isolated state and handshakes are no longer the social norm, then how do you actually think about the next 6 months and 12 months? So I wrote about predictions, profits, and profits, as in profit in the PH, the profiting of the mind, as well as the profiting in the profit and loss. And this is a really interesting time to really consider that. How do you predict what's next? And can you, or is it actually just crystal balling?
Yeah, so I think that's that's almost like a conversation for another day. I've been doing a bit of crystal balling with a lot of people I've been interviewing over the last couple of weeks, and it's interesting. Everybody's got their own version of the crystal ball. I guess one of the things that I want to talk about is the complacency. And I've been fairly vocal and critical from a federal perspective in Australia, where there has, to me, been some bureaucratic inertia around innovation and entrepreneurship and a fair bit of lip service. I think states like Queensland and others are doing a great job in building the ecosystem. And we hear it's a little bit overused term, the ecosystem, but I think it's more important now than ever. And when I look at other parts of the world, it seems the will of governments in driving innovation seems to be one of the key things in making innovation ecosystems really thrive. What's your view on the role of the will of government in that?
So the will of the government is to balance very, very well the needs of now and the assurity of the future. And no doubt there is some predictions that can be made about where the future is heading. But ultimately, we're in a space now in time where the speed upon which that innovation is occurring just naturally, both within a technology sense, but also hidden within science, like the baseline is being disrupted. Moore's law, prime example, that will be disrupted. We're seeing quantum computing's coming into the space, a singularity that we've never seen before, that was often hidden in the pages of theorists and universities, is now becoming the reality of. But innovation is one of those words that's very difficult to put your finger on, and not everyone sees themselves as an innovator. But innovation is in a constant state of change, and that's really the simplistic nature of it. It's a very long word, multiple syllables. Maybe we can actually make it more tangible and real. We can do that when we look backwards in time. We can see what the internet has done to the way that we interact as people. We also know and understand what Wi-Fi has given us now, and that's an innovation that came out of Australia, of course. But how do we actually take that and do a predictive view of the future? Innovation needs to be threaded horizontally, and I think the mistake of most governments are that it sits siloed in a box in one department and is not necessarily threaded as a part of 100-year policy. We'd be in a very different place in the world, in Australia, if we decided that the internet and all that has to offer in a digital sense became embedded in all of policy. We'd start to be doing very different things in how we interact around the online trust mechanisms. And I believe that's really what's going to be compounded through that garlic crushing moment that we're facing right now in COVID.
The garlic crushing moment. I like that. That's so we're talking about in October, we're heading into another fire season. We're already seeing fires start to come up in other parts of the world. California, there's a fire last week in Florida, in the US. There's a lot of talk about, we've always shared resources with California. What's the impact of this virus on the impending fire season that we're heading into? And what is the role of technology and 21st century technologies in helping us to predict and manage and prevent those catastrophic fire events?
We faced one of the greatest challenges this nation has seen beyond the pandemic of COVID. The biodiversity loss alone in the fires was 1 billion animals and plants, which is just staggering to think just how crushing that is on our nation in the future endeavours. And even in bush tucker, as a prime example, we've probably lost plant species that will never return. And this is the true tragedy of the moment, that, as I said, we've had these domino effects. But where does technology play? It plays across all spectrum of the prediction of what will happen next, and thinking about how we connect all of the layers of technology that exist, not only in near field capturing of photography, whether that be the deployment of drones, but right up to satellite imagery, and allow the true strength of technologies like artificial intelligence to give us that predictive and warning system. To a certain extent, we are able to think about the disaster in a positive sense, and that is, we know how bad it can get. So we will be better prepared now than ever before. If the leader of the Titanic, with 2 hands on the steering wheel, knew and understood the effect that it had upon its passengers on that ship, then we've probably never seen another iceberg disaster like that in the history of boating. And I would say that in Australia, we're unlikely to see another disaster of that gargantuan scale again, because we're forewarned now about what this actually means.
So I saw you do a talk, and you talked about this concept of project, product, and platform, and I just love that whole sort of analogy, I guess. Can you talk through that idea of project, product, platform?
Yeah, look, it comes out around the 5-year staircase story of Everledger. We had an idea about bringing traceability of diamonds and that industry. And of course, when we think about the diamond industry, it's 500 years in the making. And for the better part, there are 81 countries around the world that participate in the diamond supply chain. But there's hyper consolidation that exists geographically. 90% of the world's diamonds are cut and polished in Surat in India. We have around 10 major mining companies in the world that extract those precious rocks out of the ground. And then, of course, it goes out to millions of retailers around the world. And when we started on the journey as a startup, we became intimately knowledgeable, and we took off bite-sized chunks of the vision and brought out a project. And the project was really driven around how do we capture the identity of that stone with some form of scientific certainty. And then, you know, that project became a product, which is the product of provenance. And then a platform was built, which connected all of the major participants in the supply chain around the world. And the platform now services the coloured gemstone industry, the high-end fashion and luxury goods industry. We often see that the power of platforms don't necessarily leap straight into a platform. It's easy to know who these platforms are. They're companies now like eBay and Amazon and Airbnb and Alibaba. They started in these molecules, you know, these sort of bite-sized atomized chunks, but knew and understood what the penultimate vision was and began building up into that project to product to platform. The next evolution to that, of course, is marketplace and ecosystems, where you begin to grow that platform in a way where it takes the ideation of others and the recreation. You've seen that as well. I mean, that is what Facebook has built. That is what Tencent has built. And I think that's just the natural evolution of anyone in a mass technology scale up that wants to have a vision of a platform, but they need to start small and then understand how they grow and re-team through that evolution of the company and of the product itself.
Yes, I saw that with Salesforce.com, you know, and I think there's a mantra in the enterprise software world that says no software company growing from 1 billion to 5 billion without an ecosystem and without those partner channels. So they evolve into that platform and then they become the ecosystem. I think that's what I witnessed over 10 years of what Salesforce.com did so exceptionally well. So I am going to ask you to crystal ball a little bit. You know, we've got parts of the economy where, you know, people like companies like Instacart who are absolutely booming, and e-commerce and Amazon and online learning platforms where we're seeing there's taking you know, exponential growth. And then we're seeing industries, particularly in Australia, like the travel industry, where we're reliant on, you know, $40 billion worth of income from international visitors. But interestingly, our domestic travel market and tourism market spends about $35 billion overseas, traveling overseas. So, you know, redirecting some of that money potentially has the effect of negating some of those losses in that industry. But I want to just talk about what, you know, from your perspective, you just take the crystal ball out. What does the economy look like as we start to emerge out of this? Putting aside, you know, a second wave and possibly a third wave of the pandemic, but what does in your world, what does that look like, the economy?
I think far more digital connectedness will exist. I believe that voice becomes the new UI. So instead of typing things or having the threat of doing push buttoning on ordering a McDonald's burger through a touchscreen might actually become all voice enabled. And I do believe that it is a reconnection and a fine balance between global and local. Goods will still move across this planet. There's no doubt about that, but there'll be far more restrictions and or conditions of travel when it comes to humans traveling. But we are creatures that are highly adaptive. So in time, wearing a mask out in the open air or having temperature guns scanning us, and even the citizen surveillance that we looked upon 2 years ago with China being so evasive and invasive technology will actually probably just become an embedded normal that most of us won't even understand, that we're all being captured through various CCTV footage, and temperature guns will be pretty much installed in all major public venues and spaces around the world, whether that be airports or even sporting facilities, and that will become embedded within infrastructure in those buildings. And we spoke about, smart technology in the home. Hey, Google, turn on the lights. That type of technology that is domesticized will become now large scale in infrastructure. And it will be reporting back into the central health authorities of government and even the WHO, so that we can see and understand what the true outbreak of the next pandemic is going to be. As we start merging the worlds together in digital and physical, we should really be thinking about the ethics around how we're deploying these technologies, not only to ensure the safety of our citizens, but the privacy of our citizens. So a big call out for me is this centralized authority that has existed in technology companies is being questioned and has been questioned for some time, Facebook being one of those prime examples. But technologies are here now, like blockchain technologies, digital currency technologies that enable the true peer-to-peer exchange of data without the true trusted or untrusted central authority having that big brother view. Rising cryptography like homomorphic encryption will become embedded as the normal. So we can, in a trustless world, become trusted.
So just one last follow-up question on that, the idea of global. I've been reading a lot in The Economist around globalisation and how that's going to be impacted. And you talked about global, and Jeremy Rifkin talks about that in his writings and in his Third Industrial Revolution. Just can you explain the concept of global?
Well, it's a global and local. Everledger is a prime example of that. We provide for platforms of provenance in global supply chains and bring a recalibration of risk, but we are also able to connect in a distributed way a localized supply chain and help companies pivot from what was once, a gin distillery into a sanitizing platform, in a hand sanitizing platform. So the global and local is, literally we start to see outward. We look out the window or in the mirror, particularly those that are amazing leaders. And typically when we think about true growth metrics, as you said before, our tourism, we probably will be in a healthy state here in Australia because our domestic spend can be bolstered up by the potential of our redirected international spend. So how better than not wait till you're a grey nomad to travel around Australia? Do it now while you're upwardly mobile and connected. Go down there, get a Winnebago and go jump around Queensland. I think it's brilliant. Not only that, it's going to be pretty exciting because there'll be a total birthing of citizen science. This consciousness that as a planet, we have real concerns about climate and environment. And if we are traveling as a part of tourism, then why not actually take that social currency and start to give back into taking photos or using some drone footage that you've been there in a leisurely outward, and then try and contribute that back for the better good of tomorrow. If you were traipsing through some of our Daintree forest and you saw and recognized that there was a huge potential threat of an undergrowth, then why not report that back into our government authorities? I mean, what better way to spend a holiday to have a full consciousness that, when you're walking the beach, the only thing you're leaving behind is footprints.
I think that's a fantastic note to finish this on. Leanne Kemp, thank you very much. Thanks for all the great work you do, not only in Queensland, but globally. And I think I'm going to go out and buy a Winnebago.
You definitely should. You should get outside. It's absolutely glorious today. You know what they say? Queensland, beautiful one day, perfect the next.
Perfect the next.
Queensland's a Queensland, my friends. See you later. Bye.
See ya. Bye.